So I've been rereading the Hunger Games series, and it had got me thinking a lot about our current situation in America. I'll be doing a bit of a combined thing here with analyzing Katniss as a character and her kind of stance as an unreliable narrator, as well as using her as a bit of a catalyst to talk about similar things in America today. I also want to note I'll be going largely off of book canon here, and there may be some small spoilers for Sunrise on the Reaping, but I don't talk about it a lot. So let's just get into the video. I like to keep Jesus close, but my demons closer. There's been some debate as of recently if Katniss would be considered an unreliable narrator. An unreliable narrator is generally the protagonist in a first-person book or otherwise whose perception alters the way we understand the story. This may be intentional deception, mental illness, or simply personal bias. A good example of this is in the movie American Psycho. When watching this movie for the first time, it's not clear until the end that all of the violence occurring is some combination of violent intrusive thoughts or delusions. We believe these events to be occurring as we watch the movie from the perspective of the protagonist who believes them to be up until the end when we're shown otherwise. Going back to Katniss, her unreliability isn't remotely as extreme as that example, and I think she is actually, for the most part, a reliable narrator with one notable exception, that being how she actually views her relationships and herself. Throughout all three books, Katniss repeatedly undermines her own importance or the impact that she has on others beyond her immediate family, Gale, and later Peeta. Not in necessarily a self-deprecating way, but a rather matter-of-fact way. There's a few primary examples of this, but it's present throughout the books. I think that these couple examples I'm going to give serve to show somewhat the kind of categories of her perception of herself and her relationships. In the book, there's a character named Madge omitted from the movies, to my dismay. She's the daughter of Twelved's mayor and a friend of Katniss. Katniss dismisses any meaningful relationship she has towards Madge. While she does state that they spend time together, she's surprised to see Madge visiting her after the reaping. In the books, Katniss receives the Mockingjay pin from Madge, as she's given her 1 hour of goodbyes to friends and family. We found out in Sunrise on the Reaping that the pin was made as a matching set for Maisie and Marilee Donner by Tam Amber, a member of the Covey. It's stated in Catching Fire that Katniss's mother was friends with Maisie, and Katniss concludes the girl hugging Maisie on the tape of Haymitch's games is her mother, and that the other girl shown is Madge's mother, Maisie's twin, Marilee Donner. Katniss is somewhat confused by Madge's appearance and willingness to give her a family heirloom to take it to the arena. Madge is very abrupt and insistent that she takes the pin, starting off the interaction immediately telling Katniss that she's allowed a token from her district and to please wear the pin. Katniss accepts, but remains confused at her insistence. She repeatedly states her only connection to Madge is by selling her father strawberries she's gathered from beyond the fence. Post-games, she makes an effort to spend more time with Madge, eating lunch at each other's houses and watching her play the piano. She now considers her a friend, but makes note that that's new. This example serves to show that she does not see herself as having relationships outside her family beyond transactional ones. We see this again as she presumes her district's respect towards her as she volunteers is simply because she helps provide food for her community, and also directly states, "I don't think of District 12 as a place that cares about me." Also often assumes that the respect she garners is due to people's relationship with her father, not herself, and takes what's meant to be praise from Peeta as an insult as a result of this, believing that he's saying people give her good deals for her game out of pity. We can see this type of thought process on a wider scale regarding her reluctancy to lead a revolution throughout the book. While in the movies her attitude is painted as more so one of purely self-preservation and opposing the rebellion due to it resulting in violence. In the books we see inside her head and are privy to the information that she hopes there is a rebellion but also dismisses her own role in it. She's eager to learn which districts are rebelling and initially learns about 8 through catching a glimpse of the mayor's TV while visiting Madge. Her prep team are complaining about a lack of resources in the capital, and she feigns sympathy in order to find out which resources are lacking and deduce which districts may be rebelling based on industry. She also has a somewhat coded conversation with Beetee akin to this in the training center, using statements like, "I hear there's a shortage of shrimp" from District 4, with Beetee exchanging other shortages he's aware of, and concluding with him asking how coal production is going, with an obviously disappointed response of basically, "It's going well" from Katniss. Despite this, she repeatedly remarks that she's unsure why she is in the position of leading instead of Peeta, as they both quote-unquote pulled the stunt with the berries, but he's much more charismatic than her, and is shocked by half the tributes of the Quarter Quell wanting to ally with her, as well as the respect she receives from others such as Joanna, or is suspicious of people like Finnick or Plutarch's hints at their allyship. Katniss repeatedly makes statements or has internal thoughts about her insignificance, that she cannot be capable of being the person to lead a rebellion or even meaningfully influence the behavior of others. She fixates heavily on supporting her family and later Peeta, obviously because she cares about them, yes, but also in such a way that she seems to believe that they can be the only people she's capable of impacting with her actions. Even in regards to the actions of the Capitol, she believes that her influence only goes as far as those that she's close with. When Gale and Katniss once again discuss leaving District 12, Katniss lets it slip that there's a rebellion, and Gale notes that the capital could bomb 12, something that does eventually occur, but Katniss concludes is unlikely during this conversation. She's extremely reluctant to trust her allies in the Quarter Quell, despite clear indication that there was conversation going on without her to facilitate their alliance, even contemplating killing Finnick and assuming that Finnick is attempting to ensure Peeta's death rather than give him CPR. When Plutarch shows Katniss the Mockingjay Watch, she assumes it's a capital fad and goes on a brief mental rant about how much she hates capital people and how gross it is that he's trying to win her over with something that she views as superficial. None of this is criticism of Katniss as a character/person, as in the world she exists, and these are safe conclusions to come to. But I point them out to highlight something. Katniss is not an unempathetic or uncaring person. On the contrary, she's repeatedly shown to be very devoted and selfless when she actually believes her actions will impact others. That's obvious from the beginning with her volunteering for Prim. But my ultimate point in this video is to show how government propaganda and control of information not only informs national identity and culture, but how those things seep into our own self-perception. Many people describe Katniss's moments of being an unreliable narrator in relation to her trauma, and I think that's absolutely accurate in many regards, but when it's discussed, it mainly focuses on her personal trauma of starvation, losing her father, or of course the games. But what I mainly want to focus on is the inherent trauma of living in an authoritarian state and the wealth disparity she experiences as a result. Sunrise on the Reaping actually has one of its two main focuses/themes be in this area. Sunrise was mainly written as a commentary on two things, propaganda and implicit submission. Katniss, while not her main focus in the narrative, is a perfect example of implicit submission, and one of the main narrative points of Haymitch in the original trilogy is his parallels to Katniss. It's also the big reason that in the books she is able to discern messages from his parachutes, which in the movie contained notes where they did not in the books. She simply inferred his intent. Sunrise tackles implicit submission head-on, though, through the perspective of Haymitch. And even the title of the book, Sunrise on the Reaping, is pulled directly from early pages where Haymitch is expressing this submission with his girlfriend who disagrees. This conversation is in regards to the fact that his birthday occurs on the Reaping, and there has always been a Reaping on his birthday, therefore he believes that there will always be a Reaping as nothing has ever been different, to which his girlfriend disagrees. Implicit submission is a philosophical term coined by David Hume, meaning to submit your own will to that of rulers or authority without objection or usually some form of thought, even. It was coined by Hume to explain, quote, the easiness with which many are governed by the few and the implicit submission with which men resign their own sentiments and passions to those of their rulers, end quote. This idea applies not just to authoritative governments, but to any form of governance. For example, we all accept that the consequences of violent actions against another will be jail. It is given that assault, murder, or rape will be met with that specific consequence, and furthermore that the people deciding the severity of that punishment will be a judge, jury, and attorneys. While we may not accept or agree on the intricacies of that, such as opposition to the death penalty or appeals over what's deemed an unfair sentencing, we all implicitly submit to the idea and accept the terms of the legal processes of that retribution. While I dislike sovereign citizens as much as the next guy, by extension we all simply laugh at those who decide they are not required to submit simply because they are of a different opinion. We accept we must have a license to drive a car, that we are not to move into a home for which we have not bought or signed a lease, that we are not to impersonate a police officer or a doctor. These are not unfair rules. I don't think they're things that need to be challenged, but that does not change that we accept them without much thought. It's simply the way things are. However, implicit submission does in fact go beyond the mundane of getting a license before driving a car and extends to the extreme ends of authoritarian governments. Of course, these things are harder to create implicit submission for, which is to an extent where the authoritative nature of most oppressive regimes come in. In The Hunger Games, we see this through a wide variety of actions that help create Haymitch and Katniss's feelings of insignificance, of inability to affect those around them so long as they are at an arm's length. The most obvious example of this is preventing solidarity or even communication between districts. There is not intra-district travel allowed, nor communication, and even the mayor of 12 requires an invite to the capital to go. Katniss is unaware just how much more violent and unforgiving the peacekeepers in 11 are compared to 12 until she meets Rue. The capital panics, shuts off the power, and cancels reruns after a show of solidarity between the victors during the Quarter Quell. And in Sunrise, the less privileged districts create their own larger alliance/career pack to stand a chance against 1, 2, and 4, which in Catching Fire is seen to be omitted from the recordings of his games. As a first step, this alone is quite efficient as a means of enforcing submission. Your sphere of influence is only as large as your district unless you are reaped, and the games themselves present other districts as your enemy rather than the capital, something highlighted in Haymitch's reminders to Katniss to quote-unquote remember who the real enemy is. Beyond this, we see it through the control of information. While we don't know much about education in other districts, we learn through Katniss and Prim that most of 12's education focuses on coal mining as well as Panem's history, which is painted as the capital triumphing against the enemy from within and concluding with the capital supposedly protecting and maintaining the other districts. In Sunrise, we see this idea of the capital maintaining their safety pop up even more frequently, with posters and banners hung throughout 12 stating things like no capital, no peace, no peacekeepers, no peace. While in the capital itself, these banners exist but have messages that, according to Haymitch, are more tailored to its own citizens. Haymitch uses these banners and posters as a metaphor for his own attempts at rebellion, describing them as painting his own poster. Information informs action, and our personal identity is built off of a multitude of factors which include that information that we are told about ourselves, as well as the actions that we take throughout our lives. On a less harmful scale, someone who receives great grades and is told that they're intelligent may have being smart as part of how they perceive themselves. Recovering from addiction is an action that someone takes that often becomes an integral part of identity, and the beliefs we hold in tandem with our actions, such as protest, political involvement, religious ceremonies, or good deeds, become part of our identity too. Beyond that, many people incorporate birth factors into their identity, such as race, sexuality, or nationality. Generally, these are all harmless things. However, nationality in particular presents the problem of easily being warped. National identity is founded on many things: hardships your country has overcome, the origin of said country, regional foods, but also on its politics and the way that those aforementioned things themselves are a product of politics or are used as a catalyst for future political action. An amazing example of this is the US in 9/11. It's an understandable thing on face value to shape a national identity. It's a tragedy that even those born long after it are still extremely aware of, and the people who've lived through it can tell you exactly where they were. I was a baby during 9/11, and my mom knows exactly where I was and what I was doing. However, this national tragedy was used to justify 20 long years of war crimes, not only to justify them, but to get citizens excited about them. It created a massive rise in Islamophobia as well, with people fearing and acting violently towards Muslims who were equally as mortified as they were. And the tragedy itself became overshadowed by the violence that we committed, misdirected and otherwise. Violence that was not only pointed at people who often had nothing to do with it, but was already ingrained as part of our national identity, being tied in so heavily with our extreme military budget, power, and overuse. The idea of America as a superhero with more bombs than people. In the Hunger Games, we see a similar attitude taken towards the Dark Days, where they were hard and horrible for everyone and the rebels are painted as the villains. It justifies not only the games, but the tighter grip on everyday life within the districts. Years later, it is taught through the lens of the winners that the capital is here to keep you safe from that. The history of the other side is not taught as anything other than a bad guy you definitely don't want to act like. Otherwise, there will be retribution. Retribution that is painted as just and appropriate. Katniss was taught from a young age that the only way she can impact others is to either get them hurt by engaging in rebellious acts or by focusing on her small circle of close-knit loved ones. It's noted in the books that she sang Hanging Tree as her father did, which was swiftly scolded as her doing so could get her hanged. When Prim was younger, she taught her the same thing to protect her. She has been taught that there is no use in rebellion and that it will only ever result in pain, and she has been taught implicitly by her poverty and the death of her father that all that awaits her is a future of more games, hunger, and mine collapses. She has no reason to believe that she can make the kind of impact that she has, because not only has she been told as such since her birth by the Capitol, but she has witnessed the result of trying firsthand and by being in the games herself, and through the threats from Snow for her attempt with the berries. The information she has received both in spoken words and through her life experiences has been tailored by the Capitol in order to create this belief of helplessness. People who are focusing on staying alive do not often have the luxury of focusing on bigger issues. Katniss makes a statement to Peeta that exemplifies this factor. When Peeta says if he's going to die, he wants to die as himself, to show them that he's not just a piece in their games. When he says this, Katniss is irritated and views it as impractical. She thinks of Prim and Gale and her family, and responds that she can't afford to think like that. All these things exist in smaller ways in our own country. Our history is taught in a way meant to obfuscate or recontextualize how change occurs. Everything from the civil rights movement, women's suffrage, gay history, the Red Scare, World War II are painted as a heroes and villains story. And often these situations aim to create something akin to the district versus district perspective seen in the games in order to avoid the districts versus capital situation. The civil rights movement is the most obvious example of this fact. Our history teaches it as though the government is not necessarily in the wrong, it's more so a force that just needs to be changed. It's not the villain, it's almost presented as a man versus nature type situation. Contrasting that, however, the more radical beliefs and actions of MLK are omitted, and the Black Panthers and Malcolm X are largely painted as surely nuanced, but the bad guys nonetheless. MLK won the day alone with nothing needing to be said about his pesky socialism. I have a whole video on this topic alone, so I'll link it below, but these types of lies by omission and framing exist because, like I said at the beginning, information informs action. This framing of history presents us with the following distorted information and conclusions. Peaceful protest alone will always be enough, even in the face of much more overt discrimination than we see now. Aggressive responses to oppression get you and others hurt. Peaceful protest will not put you at risk of harm from the government. Violence begets more violence, without exception. Of course, part of what makes this work is the grains of truth. Peaceful protest can be effective, and you are less likely to get killed if you aren't doing something illegal. And at least in everyday conflict, violence is rarely the answer. But of course, these things are not the whole picture. Peaceful protest alone was not wholly responsible for the end of explicitly legal segregation. MLK was still shot, and he was told to kill himself by the FBI. And to this day, many peaceful protesters are killed and injured by police. If violence were never necessary, why do we have the #1 military budget, dwarfing even the second runner-up? The key to creating implicit submission is plausibility or lack thereof. Everything else is painted as either unachievable or horrible. Communism is bad because USSR. Socialism is unrealistic because we're not going to show you the statistics and will poison the well before you can ever get to them yourself. It does appear plausible that all oppression can be solved with voting and peaceful protest when it was one component of many and the only part of the picture that we show you. America is the best nation because you're taught nothing of value about any other nation beyond its horrors before the age of 18. So you resign without a second thought. This is how things are. You watch them work every day by seeing functional highways and being told that every unhoused person sitting on their side is there because they just didn't try hard enough. But you know that you're trying your hardest because you're doing everything your national identity tells you is the right thing to do to succeed. So while you may be poor now, you're one good idea away from a private jet. And of course, unlike all those other people in African nations you can't recall the name of, you're literate and graduated high school. So you're already miles ahead with the wonders of capitalism and meritocracy on your side. You don't know the rest of the phrase, so you believe that you can simply pull yourself up by your bootstraps. How else did anyone ever get so rich? Katniss is an unreliable narrator in the way that anyone living in an unjust state of really any severity can be. Implicit submission and propagandized national identities create unreliable narrators in everyone, because our perception of our worth, our impact, and our actions is all predicated on what we have been taught not to question and what we should be taught is the good or wrong thing to do. Human beings, fictional or real, do not exist in a vacuum. That is what people mean when they say all art, and I argue all of everything is political. You do not exist in a vacuum as you are influenced in ways you often have simply ignored or not thought notable by your environment. The actions you do or do not take are all impacted. The beliefs you hold and the way you treat people are too. The art and writing you create, the music you listen to, and the shows you watch are all created by human beings who were influenced by their environment. And your choice to consume specific ones is just as influenced as their choice to create them. Question your government and question yourself and the people around you. Don't take things for granted even when you know them to be logical or have sense. Think about shit. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like my content and want to support me in the free way, like and subscribe. If you want to support me financially and continuing to make content, check out my Ko-fi in the description or drop me a super thanks. I'll see y'all in the next one. Hade.
Like 1, 3, 1, 2 in the auto war like my last name Sun Tzu. Too many coppers and not enough justice. Know thy enemy.